The economy of Russia is as big as the economies of Belgium and the Netherlands. Again, the economy of the biggest country of the world is smaller than two tiny European countries combined. Meanwhile, Russia weighs so much more in the world than Belgium and the Netherlands. But how? We are going to answer all these questions in this video. My name is Haik and I welcome you to Global Political Analysis channel. The GDP of Russia is of the same order of magnitude as the combined GDP of Belgium and the Netherlands. Although GDP doesn't represent the whole economy, it still acts as an economic indicator. So how the economy of the biggest country in the world is smaller than the two tiny countries in Europe? But this perplexing statistic prompted me to ask why politically Russia weighs so much more in the world than Belgium and the Netherlands, while economically that country is hardly stronger than these two countries bordering the North Sea. Before answering these questions, first, some other figures illustrate how an economic lightweight Russia is. US GDP reached $20 trillion in 2017. With GDP as a yardstick, the US is 14 times bigger than Russia. In the same way, other countries can be compared with Russia. China is economically 8 times larger than Russia, Germany 3 times, France 2 times. And the European Union as a whole is 12 times bigger than the Russian Federation. The economic size of a country is one of the most important factors that determine its military and political importance in the world. A large economy is needed to provide the means that gives the country military and political weight in the world. So it is clear, Russia is boxing above its economic weight on the international scene. The fact that Russia means so little economically implies that the country must exert extraordinary efforts to create a strong military potential. In 2017, Russian military spending amounted to $61 billion, according to the International Institute of Strategic Studies. The US spent nearly 10 times more, namely $600 billion. China spent $150. France and Germany together spent $90 billion on defense, 50% more than Russia. And yet, all these countries spent a much smaller proportion of their GDP on the military than Russia. Russia is not a major player in the field of military spending. To have a certain military weight, that country must reserve a much larger share of its GDP for defense than the other countries. To mean something militarily, Russia has to put a heavy burden on its economy. I come back to my question. Why is it that Russia, which economically is a lightweight, has such an importance politically and militarily? Here is an attempt to answer that question. First, there is the fact that at the time of Soviet Empire, Russia built up a nuclear arsenal that, together with the USA, gives this country a unique position in the world. This is the position of mutually assured destruction. This means that the country can destroy the opponent in the event of a nuclear attack on its territory. No other nuclear power outside the US has that capacity today. As long as Russia has such a terrible MAD capacity, it will be politically heavier than its GDP suggests. Russia is also an important supplier of raw materials, including oil and gas. This gives the country a political lever concerning Western Europe. It is possible by turning the tap, or threatening to do so, to exert pressure on several European countries. However, that effect should not be overestimated. Russia also knows that the use of this weapon will, in time, encourage European countries to find other sources of supply. The power of Russia is limited in this domain because the country doesn't have a monopoly on oil and gas. Finally, and this is my most important point, Russia is powerful because Europe grants that power to Russia. Europe has built up an economic union, but not a defense union. The European Union is economically 12 times larger than Russia. It's a huge potential power. However, this economic power is not converted into military and political power because the defense has remained a national matter. By merging their military capabilities, it would be possible for France and Germany to build a credible defense against Russian threats without having to spend more. The combined military spending of such a Franco-German defense union would be 50% higher than Russian military spending, enough to offer a counterweight to a Russian dictator whose political and military ambitions in Europe remain unknown. But is Russia still a superpower? Well, let's start with big guns. Russia still has an enormous nuclear arsenal with over 8,500 warheads, 1,800 of which are operational, meaning they can be launched at any time. That is a lot of firepowers, but at the same time it is firepower that works only as a deterrent, meaning that firing their warheads at the US or anywhere else would bring the same amount of destruction on Russian soil. It would be skirmish of mutual destruction, so in that sense their warheads are operational but not actionable. Concerning troops, Russia has nearly 900,000 active duty troops and as many as 2.5 million troops in reserve. In comparison, these numbers are closer in size to the South Korean army and hence can't be compared to the US army. The number of active troops in the US is 1.5 million. Moreover, the army is mandatory in Russia and anyone at the age of 18 should serve in the army, whereas in the US it's on voluntary basis, and despite millions of applications, not everyone would be recruited into the army. This difference is important. Although Russian soldiers are obliged to go to army, soldiers in the USA are motivated in serving in the army. This, in turn, will have a positive impact on overall army experience and results. However, not only the number of troops is important, but also where those are stationed, and this is where Russia shows weaknesses. Outside of their borders, Russia only has a handful of active military bases, somewhere between 10 and 18, including their base in Cuba, which recently was described as not a base, but a way station. By comparison, the US has 600 military facilities outside of their borders. France has 11, so Russia is closer to France than to the US. Moreover, the Russian army is not particularly well armed or funded either. In comparison, the US military expenses in 2014 were more than $600 billion, whereas Russia spent way less than 100. Plus, most of Russia's equipment and military vehicles are holdovers from the Soviet era. They do have, however, more tanks than the US, but only 10% of the Russian army is equipped with modern weapons, and changing those numbers might take decades. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia's military-industrial complex completely collapsed. Although Putin tries to build it back up, but things are moving slowly. Technological gap in the recent 30 years will be difficult and near to impossible to catch up. Russia is, as President Obama indicated, a regional power, not a super one. Thank you guys for watching this video, please subscribe and hit the like button.